Hello and welcome to the last Teaching Physical Sciences webinar for Term 2. Today we're joined again by Amber. Hello, Amber.
Hello, Helen.
And we're talking planning today, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes, lots of planning to do or to talk about. Now, we've also got Dylan behind the buttons who's laughing at me. Hi, Dylan.
Hi.
Remember, you can join the conversation with the hashtag VTScience, and please do. There are a couple of controversial points that we'd like to have your opinion on. So Dylan will be watching the Twitter feed, and he'll let us know what your thoughts are. Now, Amber, you were with us last week, but maybe there's someone out there who didn't watch last week and knows nothing about you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a grade 11 and grade 12 physical and life sciences teacher. And I teach at the Chinese school in Pretoria. Yeah, I've been teaching for 12 years.
Okay, and you've been teaching all around the world in all sorts of different circumstances and different curriculums.
Yes, and I've taught grade 4 all the way up to matric.
I didn't know that. Grade 4?
Yes, they're scary.
It's a completely different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yes, very much. You have to be a special kind of teacher to teach the little ones, as some people think about teaching grade 12.
Yeah. Different strokes, I suppose.
True.
Yes. Now, usually we start off with the webinar by looking at this book that I've been reading. The book is called Teach Like a Champion, and today's actionable step is actionable step number 10. So we're about a fifth of the way through, seeing as there are 49 actionable steps. I wonder why he stopped at 49. Oh well. Today's step actually fits in very nicely with the topic, and the step is double plan. And this is a direct quote from the book. It says, important to plan for what students will be doing during each phase of your lesson, as it is to plan for what you'll be doing and saying. I'm struggling with my reading today. Basically, what that's saying is that as you plan what you'll be doing as a teacher, you should be planning what the students are doing in response to you as a teacher. It almost changes the whole way you think about planning, doesn't it?
I think so. I think it's something we do subconsciously as well. We don't always plan directly what we will do, what they will do, unless we're still studying. But once we've been in the classroom for a while, we kind of just, no, we do this, they do that, we do this, they do that. And we have our expectations for what they should be doing.
So it almost becomes robotic after a while.
No, I think it changes all the time. But you still have a general idea of the structure of a lesson, because I think it changes throughout your career too. So a teacher that's just starting off in the classroom, or someone who was working in another profession and maybe doing their teacher qualifications later in life, will have to really structure how they're going to attack the lesson and what their learners should be doing and how they're going to be doing it. Whereas someone that's been in the classroom for a while, you just kind of know what they're going to do.
Yes. My first teaching gig was a 4-month locum post in grade 6 classroom. And there you teach the same class for the whole day. And I did what I thought all teachers do, and I planned every lesson with, okay, in the maths class we're going to do pages 4 through to 8, and then in history we'll do pages 56 and 57, and that was my planning. And I found very quickly within the first 2 days that I hadn't planned enough diversity. And I also hadn't taken into consideration the fact that the learners would be doing the same thing the whole day. And anyone who has a grade 6 child or has taught there knows that that is a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm. I think they'll get bored very quickly.
Yeah, I think I was bored as well. Dylan, yes.
Well, I think the one thing I wanted to say was exactly on that when you are planning very particularly what you're going to be doing, that's easy because you're in your own head. But as you start to plan what learners will be doing, if at every stage it's sit quietly and listen, sit quietly and listen, sit quietly and listen, I think very quickly you start to figure out, okay, maybe this lesson needs a little something extra, because all that I'm expecting of the learners is to sit quietly and listen, and that's not really when or how learning happens.
I agree.
And I was also thinking while we were talking about this topic and planning about some of my worst lessons, and I've had some shockers in my time. And the worst ones obviously were usually in the first year of teaching, so I finished that 4-month stint, and then I realized I needed to plan out everything meticulously. So I would write the introductory paragraph down, and then I would write down which worksheet I was going to introduce, and then which questions I was going to check, and which questions I was going to leave them to do for homework, and how I was going to check the homework. My problem with that kind of planning as well was that I would write it down and think, okay, it's done. And then I'd get to the lesson 2 or 3 days later and completely forget what I'd written down, and then be staring at a piece of paper while I'm trying to teach because I'm reading what my lesson plan was. And rather than planning what they should be doing, I had been planning the whole time what I should be doing. Yes, that was just, I'm not, you look like I'm just talking about my experience here. Yeah.
I'm giving you big eyes.
Yes. Amber, okay. So we've done a lesson on planning before, and we spoke about a lot of good topics, and it is out there on the Teaching Mathematics part of the webinar, part of our website. You're welcome to go and take a look at it. But at the end of the webinar, I said to Lee, who was with us, that it feels like we spoke about it a lot, but there wasn't a lot of structure to what we've spoken about. So today, we're trying to approach it in a different way. And we're going to start with the doom and gloom slide that you drew up for us. And it's literally called Doom and Gloom. And it's the first one. Basically, the slide is telling us what will happen if we don't plan.
Yes.
Yes. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, and all the bits in between. The first slide says, or the first point says, lose contact time and don't get to cover the CAPS content by the end of the term or year. Tell us about that.
I think the CAPS is designed in such a way, especially for physical sciences, that it's very full. And that we rely on content across the 3 years to contribute to matric work. And if you waste time or don't use your time constructively, then you actually fall behind. And then you have to gain that back at some other point. But there's no gaps in it for you to ever really have that opportunity. So you get stuck with those extra lessons and the after school and the cramming. But if you don't do that, then you actually leave out essential work, and then you're disadvantaging your learners.
So you're saying that if one of the possible outcomes of not planning is that we would take too long on sections, resulting in us not finishing everything by the end of the year.
Yeah, because if the allocation is 8 lessons or 8 hours, and you waste 3 of those, then you have only 5 hours or 5 lessons to catch up 8 lessons worth of work. And sometimes that's not possible. So then you snatch 3 lessons from the next section of work, and then it goes the next section, and then it's that snowball effect. And at the end of the year, you realize it's 2 weeks of work, or perhaps a whole topic that you don't have time to cover, and it gets crammed in or left out, and that's really disadvantaging the learners.
Is it possible that by not planning, you could also run short of things to teach? In other words, you teach too fast?
I don't think so, because I think if you teach everything that's in there, as educators, we have certain areas that we're passionate about, and it's always nice to add in those extra tidbits, and maybe you'll reach the learner on a topic that's not in the curriculum that's relevant, that you've addressed. It shouldn't just be things that you've pulled out of your head, but things in the media that haven't made it into the CAPs are really good to use, and you can always do those practicals and reinforce skills. So if you teach too fast, but your learners are able to keep up with it, then there's lots that you can do with them. But I think also not planning, it's a bullet point we didn't put, you could go and teach something that was old curriculum from an old textbook.
I heard of something recently where it was a different subject altogether, where they were teaching something that's not in the curriculum at all, and never examined in grade 10, 11, 12. And here are these students wasting 2 weeks on doing homework in something that's been completely written out of the curriculum.
And that they won't ever need, because it doesn't lay a foundation for work that they would be eligible to do in university anyway.
Yeah.
So it's very, very detrimental to the learners, because not only are you teaching them something that's irrelevant to them, they're not going to be examined, they've wasted their time, they've taken time away from other subjects, and at the end of the year you're going to run out of time because you haven't kept to the allocations of the CAPs, and you'll have to leave topics out. So it's really scary, especially if you're a parent.
Now, we are going to go to the CAPS document just now. In fact, in the next slide, we're going to start talking about the CAPS document. But just to emphasize what you're saying over here, is that you need to know what the CAPS document is saying with your planning so that you keep good time and that you cover everything that's in it. That's all part of planning. CAPS document is very integral to it.
Yeah, the CAPS document is so nice because even if you're a solo teacher for a subject, it allows you to keep on time. Because I know in past environments where there was up to 12, 14 science teachers in a department, we could just chat with the teacher next door and say, what lesson are you on? And it was prior to CAPS, so we didn't have these exact time allocations. And that's how you would keep pace, is with the other teachers teaching the same grade, same subjects as you. But now with CAPS, it spells out exactly how many hours are allocated to each topic and exactly what you should be covering in that topic, and guidelines how to cover it, practical tasks that you should be doing or could be doing.
We'll get to that just now. But yeah. Yes, Dylan.
I'll ask a quick question. In your experience of teaching with the CAPS document, are the time allocations right?
I think I tend to teach quicker than the CAPS allocations, which allows me to add in other stuff into my classroom. So sometimes I go off on these tangents, and the kids ask me things that are happening in their environment, and I try to stick to content-related stuff with them, but it gives me the liberty to go and elaborate. And sometimes, as classroom teachers, we're not just teaching physics. There's all kinds of things happening in our learners' lives, and it's important for all of the teachers, not just life orientation teachers, to go and address these things. So I think it's, if you have time to talk about it, if you're able to go quick enough, or to the right pace, then it gives you liberty to look at your learners other than just related to the content of your subject as little people, or people, not so little, all of them.
Okay, the second point says learners lose confidence in the teacher's ability and competency. Now, this is from the doom and gloom slide. So it's basically saying that if you're not planning, then the learners will lose confidence in you.
I think so, because you look disorganized and you look flustered, and sometimes if you haven't gained their confidence already, so especially if it's at the beginning of the year or a new grade that you haven't taught before, or a new group of kids, new school, then you don't have your reputation yet. And those learners are watching you and they are judging you. So if you're unprepared and you don't know the content, or you don't have a plan for what you're supposed to teach them, then they lose confidence very quickly. And I think a lot of times it could be very detrimental, and I don't know that you would get it back. So I think it's so important to have a clear plan, and if you do not know something at some point, which none of us know everything, then it's difficult to admit as an educator that you have a gap in your knowledge. But if you've planned properly, then you're able to usually save face and avoid that. So.
Now, the more we talk, and we've been talking about this for a couple of hours now, it hasn't just been the 15 minutes that we've been here, the more I get the feeling that it's not just about planning what's going to happen in your lesson. Like my example is page 4 to 10 of the maths textbook. It's not about that. It's about brushing up on your content knowledge as well before you teach the lesson.
I think so, definitely. And with your maths and physical sciences, well, those are the subjects I'm more familiar with, and life sciences, I always like to make sure that I'm ahead of the learners and I've worked through the Hobart questions, because they can get you off guard very quick,
Yes.
especially with those very high ability learners that go above and beyond, or they do it a different way than you would do it. So if you've worked it out before them, then it just minimizes the chance of you looking silly. Oh.
Okay, the third point says class management issues arise and discipline becomes a problem. Now, Tuesday's show for maths this Tuesday was about classroom management, and we spoke a lot about how planning can impact classroom management negatively, or lack of planning can impact classroom management negatively. Why don't you elaborate more?
I think if you don't have a good rapport with your learners, so again, new group, new class, whatever, then you need to have quite a rigorous structure to your lesson in order to keep them on task and keep them focused. So you might switch activities more regularly, but you need to have a plan for first we're going to do, second, and so on.
Okay, by good rapport, what do you mean?
I think after you've been teaching a class for a while, or after I have been teaching a class for a while, I always form quite a nice relationship with my learners, so that I can say, okay, this is what we're going to do today. It's going to take however long. These are my expectations for you, and then let's do it. And then I know whether I have time to waste ahead of time, so I can let the jokes or the funny story come in. But I also know that I am the educator at the end of the day, and I have to finish the content that I've planned to finish. So if there's not time for discussion, then there's not time that lesson. And if there's time for 5 minutes of other conversation, then I only allocate that 5 minutes.
Okay, so by good planning, you're avoiding going off the topic, and going off the topic results in discipline issues or classroom management issues.
I think it could. At this stage in my career, no. But when I was 23 and in my first classroom of all boys at an all-boys school in England, then it definitely could go very wrong very quickly. And those were full classes, and there was my tears, at times, but not anymore.
Yes, Dylan.
I think that anything that builds your class's confidence in your ability to teach is invariably going to help with discipline and management. And anything that detracts, that removes, that lessens the class's confidence in you as a teacher, the natural human response is to not take that person seriously. Mm-hmm. And therein lies quite a lot of poor classroom management and ill discipline on the part of learners, because they're not trusting you. And that's a point that came up on Tuesday, that the development of trust between you and learners is something that you have to earn. And one of the ways perhaps that you earn that is by being prepared, by having well thought out, well structured plans and knowing exactly where you want to go. And I suppose that's true for any leadership position.
Yeah, and I think it's something that snowballs, and also it's something that's influenced by other people. So if parents lose faith in a teacher, then they shouldn't say that to their children, because the teacher at some point is going to get back on track. Maybe they're just having an off couple of days, and then the learners don't realize the same way. And it also happens in the staff room. So I think it's important for people to keep certain opinions to themselves and stay to the facts, and maybe act towards developing one another instead of just pointing fingers.
Yes. Yes. Difficult to do in a competitive schooling environment sometimes.
Yes. But we do have to help one another.
Yes.
I think everyone has their strengths and we all have our weaknesses. So it's important.
Your last point says you should have a plan and even a backup plan. What if? Why don't you tell us about that a bit more?
Well, anyone that knows me well knows that usually I have plan A through J, because I always think what if. So, for example, if you have a wonderful PowerPoint or website interactive link that you intend to use in your class, or you intend to make a printout of the most fabulous worksheet that you've thought up in the middle of the night, and then you want to quickly print it out in the morning during your prep period, and you're going to give it out to your class, and then the photocopy machine is not working. What is your plan B? So plan B is take the handwritten copy and write it on the board. But then if the projector is not working and you wanted the interactive website, do you have a textbook to reference from? Or what are you going to do? You can't just say, oh, it's not working, we're going to do nothing this lesson. So you have to have plan B and C and D.
Yes, because lost time is lost time, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, now we said we were going to talk about the CAPS because we know that CAPS does a lot of the planning for us, doesn't it?
Yes, I'm a big fan, and I think the more I look into the CAPS, the more I love the CAPS. Like any document, has some small flaws, but as educators, I think we're creative enough and have problem-solving skills, so can go and tweak it and make it your own.
Now, when you first saw it, did you feel this love for it?
No.
So people who are sitting out there and shaking their head at you now, saying, you know, she's talking rubbish, maybe they need to read it a bit more.
Yeah, because I think when it first came out and the textbooks are all changing and we're kind of in a routine of working and teaching with what we've been teaching, none of us really like to be thrown into the deep end. And change,
especially as teachers.
Yeah, change makes people uncomfortable, but change is the only way to develop as well, and we all know that. So if change is forced on us, people are usually hesitant, but as soon as you start to just realize, yep, it's the way it's going to be, and accept it, then a lot of the time, midway through, you realize, oh, it's not so bad. And actually, I think the CAPS have been well designed. And I'm not just saying that, I really do use them. Because it makes life so easy.
Oh, good. Well, let's take a look at the document. We've got it open to page 10. Tell us about what's happening there.
Page 10 and 11 tells us the overview of the topics. So it breaks all 6 topics, the 3 for physics and 3 for chemistry, down. For all of the content that's supposed to be covered in grade 10, 11, and 12 with the hour allocation. So it's just an overview, and that's exactly what it says. Then if we go to page 13 and 14, it's an overview of practical tasks. So it does grade 10, term 1, 2, 3, 4, all of our formal assessments and practicals, and it gives us choices between different ideas for physics and chemistry. It doesn't plan the prac, it doesn't plan the nature of the prac for us, but it gives us an idea so that our learners are doing the same thing as the other schools are doing. And in all honesty, it's probably the same practicals that you would have done prior to the CAPS, because they actually relate with the content that's been taught. And then depending on your resources and the nature of your learners, you can simplify it or elaborate on it as much as you want to. So you can make them open-ended tasks or worksheet structured. Yeah, you can do as many or the minimum of what's specified, but they should be actually doing at least one chemistry prac or physics prac a term.
Okay.
So it should never be a case where you have matric learners who haven't done practical work.
Now, seeing as we are talking about planning, how much effort does it take to plan a prac?
It takes a lot of effort to plan a prac. And it depends the nature of the environment. Again, context is so important. But there's a lot of literature, a lot of articles and research that's been done to say that those that want to do practicals find a way. And there's always the stories of the people in the under-resourced labs that have expired chemicals and don't have equipment. But if you realize the value in a practical and you've been able to do them yourself as a learner or been exposed as educator, then you realize that it's actually really exciting. So it's exciting for the teacher, it's exciting for the learners. It's exciting for the teacher, not just the nature of the practical, but actually seeing their faces light up. And you get to some of those kids that aren't necessarily your book smart or your most enthusiastic when it comes to working out calculations, but they really like fire. So then you can inspire those learners, and sometimes that's all they need is a little bit of fire and a few bubbles, and then they like science. And then they will work for you, especially if you bribe them with more practicals. So, yeah.
So they like the practicals?
They love practicals, but practicals are a lot of work to plan. And if you have an under-resourced lab, they can be really expensive. But you can always start with demonstrations first, so then you order in the minimal equipment or you borrow from a neighboring school. And it's not ideal, but it's still great for the learners to see. And the amazing thing now is that we have all of these YouTube videos and websites all over that do a lot of the practicals for us. So if you can only do it as a demonstration, then you can always put it up or give the kids the address, the URL,
yes,
so they can go and watch it again.
Of course, it doesn't have the same effect as
it doesn't
doing it
have
in
the
real
same
life.
effect. So if you don't have the chemicals or the apparatus, it's much better if you can borrow a little bit from another school and try and do it for your learners, because it makes a big difference.
I wonder if it would make sense to plan to come together as different schools and have an afternoon where you do a particular prac together to share the load of the planning of doing pracs.
Yeah, it really does. And some schools are well resourced, so they have lab technicians, and other schools don't. So schools that have lab technicians, if they were willing to share, and at least with the preparation of making stock solutions and things like that, then it would also make it easier. And I know a lot of the schools are equipped with these micro kits, and then they have everything that you could need in it. And it's not the large scale that we did 10 or 15 years ago, but it gives the learners all access, and it uses smaller amounts. So it's less harmful to the environment. There's less to dispose of, but it still gives the learners the opportunity to engage.
Okay. Now, if we go on to page 125, and these pages are all through, in fact, the whole of CAP's document is pretty much filled with these kinds of pages. We see that it's got 5 different columns.
Yeah, I'll put mine in front of me. The first column is our time allocation.
What are we looking at? Grade 12?
Yeah, is this 125? Yeah. So this is grade 12, and it's chemical equilibrium, and we should have taught that a few weeks ago. It's the end of term 2 work in a 4-term school, and it's allocated 8 hours. So 2 hours is allocated towards chemical equilibrium and factors that affect equilibrium.
And we see that in the first column?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's your topics. And then your content, or concepts and skills is in your next column. So that's usually what I include in my checklist, which we will talk about later. And then practical activities, it tells recommended experiments, and it says for informal assessment, so it shouldn't be necessarily contributing to marks, but it could if you structure it in such a way. So then it's a couple of practicals, and the cobalt chloride and water one is really nice, and then extending it further is also a possibility. with the hydrochloric acid, and then your...
So this experiment, this recommended experiment, would that take the 2 hours that have been allocated to it?
The practical, I did it with my class as a demonstration this year, which, since it's an informal assessment anyway, a demonstration is adequate.
What is the difference?
A demonstration means the teacher does it and maybe a learner or two help and assist, and everybody can see. And then practical would mean that they do it in small groups, sometimes individuals, sometimes groups of 4, depending on the resources nature of the prac.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so you did it in your class?
And then, so here it says resource material, and it tells just for the demonstration, and then it gives extra guidelines for the teachers. So the guidelines for the teachers often address misconceptions or special things that we should know. So it's really essential to read the guidelines ahead of time.
Now, if your lesson is science lessons, they're 45 minutes to an hour long, aren't they? Generally.
Not all of them. Some schools, I think, have half hour, 35 minutes. But then if you wanted to do a practical attached on, or a lesson and then a demonstration, then you would want a double lesson. And then schools where it's an hour, it's ideal because then you can fit in the lesson and a quick demonstration.
So this particular concept is taught over 2 hours. Would you then do just the experiment, or what the content, concepts and skills? There are 2 main points with 3 sub-points afterwards. Would you spend that time talking about all of those, or explain how you would use that time?
Well, it's up to the teacher, so they haven't taken all of the power away from the teacher. It's still up to you how you want to go and do it. It's just given us the guideline to spend 2 hours. So regardless of how your lessons are broken up, you have 120 minutes to do that. So then the demonstration might take you 15, 20 minutes, and you can decide whether you want to do it at the beginning to really engage them, ooh, the color changes and this is fancy, or if you want to do it at the end as a kind of conclusion, this is the theory that we've learned in practice.
Okay.
So each class will differ, but at the end of the 2 hours, everyone should have covered the same thing.
So what they've done then is more of a macro plan, and we as a teacher then need to do a micro plan. How are we going to structure this within the number of lessons that they've recommended?
Exactly. So they haven't done all of the work for us, but they've given us a guideline. So between the hypothetical teacher in the classroom next to me and my classroom, we should be doing the same practicals. We should be covering the same work out of the textbook, perhaps using the same websites as resources, but how we go about doing that is completely different. I may go through the website step by step with my learners, and the teacher in the hypothetical classroom next to me might give the link to the website for homework.
Okay.
And use the textbook to explain it. So the how of conducting the lesson is up to personal preference.
Now, I have made this mistake myself as a young teacher, where I have assumed that a textbook explains something correctly, and I haven't read through the textbook before actually planting it in front of the students and saying, here, read this for homework and then do the questions. It's advisable, isn't it, to check all of your resources before using them?
Yes, and I think a big thing about the curriculum changing the way it has over the last few years is that the textbooks struggle to keep up. And it's difficult to find a textbook that has every single thing that's specified in the caps. So sometimes they might have a little bit extra, sometimes they might be missing a topic, which is why I make the checklist so that I can go through in conjunction with a textbook or whatever other resources I decide to use and make sure that we have covered every single thing.
Why don't we take a look at your checklist? And now you make these checklists based on the CAPS document.
That's the checklist. Yes, so I take the CAPS document, and it's actually an IEB school that I teach at. So I go and take all of the learning that is essential and look at the CAPS document and look at the definitions that they need to know.
Okay.
And the definitions are italicized, and I put all of the knowledge content in there and how many lessons should be allocated. We have 1 hour lessons, so...
I'm going to pause you here quickly. I see this checklist is for grade 12 mechanics, and you say you've taken it from the CAPS document, but you do have grade 10 and grade 11 listed over there. Where have you taken those things from?
Also from the CAPS
from
document.
page 10, where they had all the prior content knowledge, or have you gone manually through the CAPS?
Manually through. So the IEB has taken it out separate from the CAPS and put the essential to grade 12 things, but they don't break it into years. They just say this is the work that's examinable at grade 12. And then the same thing is said in the CAPS, but it's not organized in such a way. So then what I do is I take all of the learning that they have to have prior to what we're going to do in grade 12, and I allocate it the hours specified in the CAPS. So I flip through back and forth, and I find the relevant topics for mechanics, which would be specified on grade 10, or on page 10, sorry. And then I look at what should they have done in grade 10, what should they have done in grade 11, and what are we going to do in grade 12. And then I look at all of the hour allocations. I print it out for my kids, usually 2 pages on each A4 page, so that it's shrunk down and it doesn't waste so much paper. And then I go through it with them and say, you should already know, and if you don't, then you need to solve that problem. So you need to go back to your textbook from grade 10 or grade 11. You need to come and see me, attend an extra lesson, ask a friend, get a tutor.
Go onto the Mindset website.
Go onto the Mindset website and fill in those gaps in your prior learning. And a lot of times I suggest that they go and do that over the school holidays so that it doesn't infringe on their other work. Yeah, and then as we go through it, I say take out your checklists, and on page 2 of your checklist, this is the subtitle, and these are our allocations. Today we are going to do bullet points 1 and 2. These 2 bullet points correspond with pages 59 and 60 of your textbook. So turn to that and let's... Yeah, so that they have an idea of what the plan is for the lesson.
When the CAPS document came out, I was still teaching maths at that time. And I remember printing it out and then cutting it up, and cutting up grade 10 functions and sticking it on top of grade 11 functions and grade 12 functions so that I could see the progression, and hanging those long lists of paper up in my room so that I could constantly check what should have happened before and where are we going in the future. Mm-hmm. I think it's a valuable exercise to have something like that within your planning, but also to give the students access to it is very strategic, isn't it?
I think it's really good to give the students access to it. It takes some of the responsibility and puts it on them. And of course, we're the facilitators to make sure that they have covered everything, but giving them access to the CAPS documents and access to the weightings of how they're going to be assessed and how much things matter and what contributes to only grade 11 work and what's going to be examinable this year and next year. It just allows them to start prioritizing, because if we think back to when we were in high school, regardless of how diligent a learner you are, you don't have that sort of foresight to say, oh, I'm learning this now in grade 11, but it's examinable at matric. Hence, I'm going to write a cycle test or a standardized test on it. I'm going to write mid-year exams on it. I'm going to write final exams on it. And then next year, I'm going to write matric prelims on it. And then I'm going to write matric finals on it. And I should just learn it correct the first time, because I'm going to have to do it 5 times. Why would I ever think to wait until after matric prelims to realize that I don't know something if it's on a checklist for me?
And when we were talking about how to talk today. You mentioned about using your target graphs that you spoke about last week in conjunction with the checklist.
Yes, if the learners keep their target graphs, if you as the teacher have instituted something like that in your classroom, then you know where their strengths and weaknesses are. And if you know your learners well enough, then you know whether they're particularly strong at chemistry because they work really hard and study, or whether they're mathematically strong and a bit lazy. Then you know where their strengths are. So you can tell them, okay, this is a mathematical-based module. It's worth 45 or 50% of your final grade 12 exams. X amount of content is from prior years, and I know your marks weren't what you wanted them to be, or maybe they were and you want to maintain them. Then you need to work to...
So just to recap what the target graph is in relation to the checklist, you said in the checklist that for mechanics in grade 12 they needed to know vectors from grade 10, I think.
Yes.
So they would go back on their target graph, which listed all of their results for their grade 10 assessments, had them as bar graphs. And they would see where all the vectors assessments were, and they would be able to see, actually, no, I'm quite good at grade 10 vectors, and then go to grade 11 and go, actually, I got even better, so this is not something that I should revise. Or, conversely,
I can revise just a bit and know that I can get good solid marks in that area.
Yes.
Yeah. And then they can start to plan and start to think, because as educators, we shouldn't be spoon-feeding them. We should be spoon-feeding them with a little bit of a purpose, so that eventually they can feed themselves. So we guide them, and sometimes they think we're forcing them, which we are, to do certain things, and then we hope that those skills are going to...
Once they've grown up a little, they can see
that there is
usefulness of it.
A method for why we do things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we don't just want to talk about planning lessons because it can be boring. I personally enjoy planning, dividing things up and things like that, but there's so much more to planning and teaching, isn't there?
Yes.
More specifically, you need to plan at the beginning of the year the setting up of your classroom.
Yes, that's true. And I love having student teachers, so university learners that come in for practicals. And I think it's really important that they realize how to structure a classroom and to give themselves the most control. So in order to have a traditional teacher-centered classroom, then you would need to have those rows and the learners all in straight lines.
The feeling gone against the teacher-centered? I mean, isn't everyone saying it should be a learner-centered classroom and all of those things?
I think there's a time and a place. There's definitely room for learner-centered classrooms and teacher-centered classrooms within even one lesson. So I think the focus needs to shift throughout. And it depends on the class and it depends on the teacher. So I personally lack structure in my classroom, and so I like to have the learners in rows, especially at the beginning of the year, and I like to place them strategically where they sit. So before they enter my classroom, they all line up, and I wait for them to be nice and quiet, and then I separate them from their friends. And I separate them from learners that are of the same home language, so that they're forced to interact in English, and they're forced to perhaps form new relationships that are based around physical sciences or life sciences. So I separate them, and I know some people think, oh, you shouldn't be separating blah blah blah, but if you allow two learners to engage with one another in their home language, something other than English, then it's detrimental to them. It's something that should be done at break time, and it's something that should be done as a second or third option to helping them understand.
Okay, why is it detrimental?
Because they're going to discuss in a home language other than English, but they're going to be examined in English. So sometimes the terminology is unclear. And we find that all over South Africa. And in my school, it's quite unique because we have a lot of Korean and Chinese. And we have Afrikaans learners, and we have various other South African languages that are home languages. So I like to distribute the learners in such a way that they're not next to someone of the same home language. And also sometimes not next to someone of the same gender, which isn't always possible. But it creates an atmosphere of diversity in the classroom and unites them with having to speak English in order to communicate with one another.
So you're saying that you want to prevent them from speaking their home language so that they...
In class, not at home.
In class, so that they practice using the correct terminology.
Yes, because they're going to be examined on that terminology. And I know people are against teaching to the test, but we have to prepare for the test. So you have to prepare them to know the definitions, to know the terminologies. And as a teacher, as the adult in the classroom, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're that they know the correct ways to phrase things and work things out and recognize. And if they're having discussions in home languages, or if you as an educator speak the home language of some of your learners, which is sometimes the case in South Africa in classrooms that I've observed, where the teacher says they can't explain it nicely in English, so they go off into another home language and they explain to the learners that speak the same language. Well, it's disadvantaging the learners that don't speak that, and it's disadvantaging the learners that do, because they might understand it brilliantly, but they won't be able to communicate it in English. So
okay, so you're saying that basically assessment rules all, and as a result we should prepare for assessment.
I am an advocate of assessment, but I don't think assessment rules all. So let me think of this nicely.
Okay, well, let me rephrase. Have you ever stood in front of a classroom and told them everyone must speak English now? And if you have you had any comeback from saying that?
No, because it's an English medium school. And that's why their parents have chose to send them to an English medium school or an Afrikaans medium school or whatever medium of instruction. It's because that's what they're supposed to be conversing and developing. So we have, I still don't know what to call her, a grade 11 Korean girl. She's awesome, that lives with us. And she's been living with us for 3 months. And when she moved in, her English was quite poor and she was struggling academically. And I told her, I'm going to take away your translator. And because they have these little computer translators that they type everything in. And then they go, oh, because they understand what it means, because they understand Korean. But that's not why their parents have put them in an English school. So now I told her, you don't use the translator until it's a last resort. So you must first try synonyms. You must try different explanations. You must try different media. So if you read the book, maybe you need to get an audio copy of the book. Or maybe someone just must explain the book to you.
Now, going back to your teacher speaking home language to students, explaining it more in their home language. Personally, I think if you're backing up an explanation, so you've explained it in English, but you can see someone over there in the corner still needs help, walking up to them and just explaining it quickly the way they understand, surely that's not the end of the world.
No, if it's a backup. So you should be explaining and confident in your explaining, which means that you've planned properly. You explain in English, you do your demonstrations, you try your different media, and if they still don't understand, then great. Have another learner explain it to them in a home language, you can explain it, they can use the translator, but then it's important to turn it back into English. So then they can use the translator, they can get the home language explanation, but then you must say, So, tell me about this concept in English.
Okay.
So that you can identify if they understand, if they have any misconceptions. It doesn't do anyone any good to say, do you understand? You have to say, what do you understand? What did you learn? What does this mean? And then they explain it to you.
Okay. Let's look at the slide, planning classroom setup. And the first point is what we've been talking about. Your classroom setup should suit the teaching technique you will adopt. The second point. Seating arrangements need to be thought out, taking into consideration discipline issues, learning barriers, personal conflicts, obviously between learners, language issues, and genders. The first point says your classroom should be set up to suit the teaching technique you will adopt for that lesson.
Yeah, and I think as educators, it's not black and white how you set up your classroom, and it's going to change. It's a dynamic process that throughout the year you can go through phases where you can relax a bit on the learners and then pull them back in, and then relax a bit and pull them back in. Or conflict arises between different learners and you must separate them. And then maybe they work it out and they can go back near to one another. Or you have the child that's the daydreamer that's looking outside all of the time. So then you need to move them away from the window and away from the door and maybe right up to the front so you can see what they're doing. Yeah, so, and those friendships that didn't always exist might exist, and now they're disturbing each other and the people around them. So then you need to shift them around as well.
So you need to constantly be in tune with what's happening in the classroom and change seating arrangements and things like that.
I think so, and it also, as an educator, puts you in control, and that's what you need to be. The learners don't have to know that you're doing it as a control thing, but moving them around is for their own good, but it's also subconsciously telling them, she has the power to move me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the last point says plan groups for group work according to ability, language, gender, personal conflicts, etc. Now, I'm assuming there that you're talking about the practical exercises where you've got 4 in a group. How would you plan those 4 together?
I think it depends on the nature of your classroom, but there's a lot of research out there about gender in physical science and in practical work, and how the girls generally, stereotypically, lack confidence when the boys are around, and the boys may not know exactly what they're supposed to do, but usually they have enough confidence to go ahead and just connect the wires to the circuit and see if the light bulb goes on or not. Whereas the girls usually are much more hesitant, and they want to know, how did the textbook do it, and this should first happen here and there. So when you plan your groups, you need to decide, do you want, what is the objective? So
Okay.
I think sometimes if you put same ability groups together, then it allows them to grow nicely with the activity, but it also tells you that you have to really focus with those groups that are a cluster of lower ability learners. That's where your attention should be going. And then your high ability learners that are going to explore a bit more are reaching those higher cognitive levels that we talked about last week. They're doing the synthesis and evaluation. They're seeing what works and what doesn't. Whereas those lower ability groups sometimes can have behavioral issues, or they might just be afraid to go and experiment a little bit. So yeah, you have to guide your attention, your strategies with the activity.
Yes. Dylan, yes.
And we've got a tweet here from Holly. Just wanted to get your thoughts on this, kind of in this section of the discussion. She says here that planning for all types of learners is very important, so you need to vary your lessons from day to day if possible where you can. And I think on the face of it, that's right. I'm just aware, though, that planning a term, you might not be able to do all of that detailed planning up front, because, as you say, circumstances change.
Yes.
So perhaps just to get your thoughts on this balance between doing a macro plan or a plan for a term or a week or a section of work, but then perhaps still understanding that that plan is not cast in stone, life happens, things change, and your plan maybe needs to be sensitive to those changes?
I think so, very much so. And sometimes in the middle of the night, like I said earlier, you get these awesome ideas, and you may have done the macro plan, you may have looked at the caps, and you've read a few pages from a textbook, and then you just are laying awake and you're checking social media, and then you see this link and you click on the link, and the link has another link, and then you get this fabulous idea. And then the whole initial structure of your lesson goes out the window. So I think it's really time consuming to type up definite daily plans. They should have an idea, and if you're a more experienced teacher, then you realize how flexible they really can be.
What would be the different varieties of lessons you would do?
That I would do. I like to use, sometimes I use videos, and things like Mindset or Khan Academy or Crash Course, and those have nice examples of lessons sometimes. And then sometimes I just think up mating strategies. Well, now I'll talk about life sciences, but we were talking about different types of courtship rituals, and then I saw the ostriches mating in one of the parks near where I live. And so I was telling the learners about it, and I said, oh, wait, let's rather Google it. So we Googled it, and there was this awesome little YouTube clip on ostrich courtship rituals. So then the kids could actually see what I was talking about. And then on to that, there was a link about peacock mating rituals.
Okay.
So we clicked on that, and the kids loved it. They thought it was absolutely fantabulous. Fantabulous isn't a word, but they just thought it was great that we could watch these 2-3 minute clips on bird courtship rituals. And it shifted the dynamics of my lesson, but I think it's something they won't forget.
Okay, so you're talking about two different instructional videos there. You're talking about lesson type videos and then videos of actual demonstrations.
Yeah, and then I think chalk and talk is
Yes.
always a method, especially if you're working out calculations. Sometimes I pick a couple of strong learners, or a weak learner and a strong learner, a couple of weak learners, and give them each a board marker or a piece of chalk, and send them up to the front of the classroom and tell them to do question 3, and then the rest of us are going to help. And they do the typical phone a friend when they get stuck.
Okay.
And then I will set out how we're going to mark it, and then they mark their own work and see how they would do if it was a real assessment. Then there's times where we read, or I'll read to them from the textbook, or I go up and down the rows and say, you read the first paragraph, you read the next one.
In our chemical equilibrium webinar, John spoke to us about using drama in the lesson as well. Get the students to act out different chemical reactions, and then the equilibrium happening and how it happens.
That's very interesting. Yes.
It's
I
a
always
good
try
webinar.
to
You should watch it.
out stuff when I describe catalysts as well, so I think my learners always love that weird and wonderful lesson. That was last week with the grade 11s. Yeah, and I think it's important because sometimes it gives them a metaphor or just an image, even if it's just to reinforce an idea. So, and then you get the attention of the child that's looking out the window. And I know they really, really love if I use the digital marker on my board. It's far more exciting for them than a regular whiteboard marker. I'm not quite sure why.
Okay.
It lights up, I guess. And then I can get even the least attentive learners in my class to pay attention. But I don't use it all the time because then it loses its special, and I don't really like it that much.
Yeah.
But and then you can stick a learner behind the computer, give them the mouse to click with.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it depends. You have to try and reach all your learners, and sometimes you have to stand on your head.
Yes. I think I agree with Holly that you must have a variety of lessons. It makes the term more interesting. Yeah, I do think we fall back onto the same sort of pattern of teaching on a more regular basis. But to do something that's different once every 2 weeks, it's not going to take that much extra effort. We're not talking about different variety every lesson. It's just
and then
something
you
out
add
of the
to
ordinary.
it every year that you've taught. So then it might have been very, very time consuming to find that perfect interactive website, but then you keep the link. And
Or
then next
develop
year,
that investigation.
yeah, or do
Yes.
the drama activity. So it takes a lot of thought. And then the first time you do it, it might not, you might get this wonderful idea of how you can improve. So then the next class gets it a little bit better. And a little bit different explanation. And then the next class or the next year, you can add a little bit onto it. And if it's something really cool, then you should share it. Because I think
That was exactly where I was going to go. Is share and steal. It's do it.
yeah,
Get the
and
best
I
out.
think it's difficult as a teacher to have enough time to view every video on every topic and every interactive site and every dramatic activity.
No, then you'll be up until 11 at night every night, Saturday and Sunday included.
Or more. Yeah.
Yes. We are running out of time. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about your planning, how you give instructions, because I think you're a little entertaining with your instructions. You were talking earlier about it. Why don't you tell me as if you're telling me for the first time again?
I think I think the learners, like you said, I have been mocked to be Charlie Brown's mom in the past with the because every time they walk into my classroom, I say, "Good morning, boys and girls. Please stand behind your desks. Please have a seat. Please take out your checklist, take out your periodic table, open your textbooks to page 205. On your checklist, we're going to do this, this, and this. And it's going to take us about 20 minutes. So it's kind of like an airline run through. Sometimes, yes, this is how you buckle your seatbelt, and then it just kind of prepares them.
There are the exits.
Yes, there are the exits, so escape while you can. But I think it just gives them an idea of what's going to happen.
So you give them a timeline of, okay, I'm going to talk I need your attention for 10 minutes, and then you're going to do a worksheet for the rest of the time, and if
you
don't
should be able
finish
to finish within X amount of minutes, and if you don't, then it's homework, and if you do, then you can work on something else, or I'll tell you a funny story. Yes.
Okay. Okay, you also said you use commanding language, and then you contradicted yourself just now because you said, please come in, please open your book. But when we were talking earlier...
It depends with what class. So if it's my matrics, which I love, and they're a little bit wild sometimes, because matrics are, but they always buckle down and work when I need them to. Whereas the grade 11s, I will, or if I end up with substitution and have grade 10s or younger... then I say, take out, and you.
So
you
rather
will,
than saying please,
you will now
just say take out your book.
Yes, and you will now turn to page 205, and you will now do question 10, and it will take you 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will correct it together. So,
okay,
yeah,
so there's no
authority
opportunity to say no thank you.
Yeah, then they work. Like they're writing a test, only it's not a test. Yes.
Okay, and it is now after 4 o'clock. So if you have anything more that you want to slip in quickly, now's your chance. Say it quickly.
I think I did, but I've forgotten. I'm sure I always have something to talk about. But that's all for today.
Okay. Dylan, any more from your side?
Just one point, and
Yes.
just to reiterate, I think one of the things that we said in this conversation that has stuck with me is good planning is not just necessary in order to get through the curriculum and make sure that you teach what you need to teach. Good planning is also essential in terms of being the leader in the classroom and being able to earn that level of trust from the learners that they know that you know where you're going. And just the example you've given now. This is what we're going to do in the lesson. These are the check boxes that you can tick off today. This is how long it's going to take. And these are the consequences for it not happening. It's just set such a clear roadmap, clear guideline that everybody feels comfortable that they can fall in line. I think that was wonderful.
Oh, and I do have one more thing. And my learners, if any of them do watch this, will appreciate it. We do Book Check Friday. So they know that I don't waste time checking books every single day. I have expectations that they do their work. And in grade 11 and 12, there's not time for me to walk around and check everybody's book. But I do check on Fridays. So they know that something can happen during the week and they may not get to the subject that I teach them, but that it must be done for Friday or there will be consequences. So it also prepares them a bit for university and for the fact that no one's going to be looking over their shoulder. And they joke about Book Check Friday quite often. Tomorrow is Book Check Friday.
And thank you very much, Amber, for joining us. And we won't have a show until the 24th of July. We've got a long break happening now, and that's, of course, because everyone's going on school holidays.
Or exams.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again on the 24th of July. Goodbye.
Bye.